when I was 15, and I went into an art studio, commercial art studio, and this was in London. And when I was 26, we left England to come to New Zealand. That was in 1960. And I joined an advertising agency. And I was with an advertising agency in New Zealand until I retired in 1990. And just before then, I'd had my first book published. And when I retired, I went on to writing and illustrating books and articles and that sort of stuff. And that's what I've been doing ever since. So I was published, but I was never a publisher.
Okay. Thank you. Being in illustrating your first choice of career?
No. My first choice of career, I didn't choose a career, I fell into a career. I wanted to do something graphic. I didn't quite know what it was when I was a 15-year-old, but as I said, I went into an art studio and things developed from there. So really it was only by finding out what was there that I moved onto a career path. Now, as distinct, say, from my granddaughter who wants to be a microbiologist and has decided to be that and has decided that will be her career. So she's already made that decision at the age of 18, whereas I went where my career led me. I never had a goal in mind. I just went wherever opportunity took me.
Oh, great, thank you.
Okay.
Your greatest influence professionally on your illustrating career and why?
Well, there are a couple of artists, illustrators, or there's probably three who have influenced me most. One was John Piper, who was an English artist who died about 5 or 6 years ago, and whose work I've always enjoyed very much. Then there was another fellow called Paul Hogarth, who was a great illustrator, a beautiful draftsman. And the third was a chap called David Gentleman. They're all English, these artists, but it was their work that I was particularly interested in when I was developing my illustration work.
Oh, thank you. Have your friends and family been in terms of realising your dreams?
Well, supportive. Well, I think friends and family have always been supportive. Certainly my wife particularly has helped me to develop my working life. She's always been there to give advice and give support. And I guess friends are mainly friends because they do support you. Don't ask me about enemies because I don't really know much about them. But as one would expect, one has had great support from friends and family.
Thank you. Attributes do you think you require in order to succeed in today's competitive world of illustrating?
It's not a competitive world.
Or in today's world of illustrating?
Well, what do you need to succeed?
Yes.
Well, you need acceptance of your work. My illustration work has mainly been for books. Books about New Zealand, particularly. I've done one on New Zealand country churches, not because I'm religious, but because I'm interested in architecture. I've done a book on the old stores of New Zealand, open 7 days, about country stores and that sort of thing. Another one on houses and cottages around New Zealand. And another one about pubs, mainly country pubs, which are interesting bits of architecture. Now, all of those have been put into book form and they've been accepted, they've sold, and therefore they succeeded.
Oh, great.
So, I mean, one basically needs acceptance by the people who you want to place them in front of.
Okay.
Right.
And do you have any two others that you see as important to succeed in illustrating? For example, passion for what you do, or hard work, or...
I think one has to stick at it. I'm not a passionate person. I'm basically, if you like, a commercial, fairly hard-working person. I have been in the past. You've got to recognise that I'm pretty old now, so my career lies in my past, not in my present. But certainly when I did my very first illustrated book, which was called New Zealand Odyssey, I did over 700 illustrations for that book. We finally used about 150. But I was working at the time. I was running an advertising agency at the time. So every morning I would get up at 5 in the morning and do a couple of illustrations. I'd go and do my day's work, and I'd come home in the evening and do a couple of illustrations. And by sticking to that regime, I accumulated over 700 illustrations. So it's a matter of application and dedication and a bit of hard work.
Oh, great. Thank you very much.
Well, they say genius is 90% perspiration and 10% inspiration, don't they? You've got to get on with it, you know.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. What advice would you give to a young person who is embarking upon a new career path?
Well, I think you've got to stick at it.
So persistence?
You've got to be persistent. You've got to realise that the harder you work, the luckier you get with a career. You've got to do the very, very best you can. That might not be as good as the best people, but as long as you're doing the best you can, then that's the target to aim at. I think in my case, I, as I told you, fell into a career. I really got led into a career. I think you've got to be prepared to change horses if necessary. You might find that you're going down a certain track of career and suddenly something else occurs to you or something appeals to you more, and you've got to be prepared to stop and start again, because no matter how old you might feel, you're never that old. I mean, typically young people of, say, about 18, 20, 25 think that they're old and that they can't stop and start again, but in actual fact they can. And I think it's important you've got to mix your achievements with being happy, because the most important thing in life is to be happy, not to make a lot of money, not to be the greatest success in the world, but to be happy. And if you find yourself locked into a career that becomes desperation, you've got to be prepared to pull back out of it and try something else.
Great, thank you.
Is it?
Can you describe the most defining moment of your career?
Well, once again, we've got to examine this career thing, you see, because I really had two careers. I had 42 years in the advertising industry.
Mm-hmm.
I retired in 1990, which means there's been 23 more years of career. And that career has been the illustrating and writing career. Now, there have been certain points in my life when decisions have been made that have become defining moments. One of them came when I changed jobs. And I was in the advertising business. I was offered a new job. I was offered a job where I would become a shareholder of the company, but I would be paid less than I would have been paid at the previous job. But somebody said to me, gave me a piece of advice and said, if you're being offered shares in that company, that's substance. If you're being paid more and given some sort of nebulous title, that's shadow. Take substance, don't take shadow. And I decided on that advice to take the new job and become a director of a company at a lower income. That led on to me becoming very successful in that company and becoming a major shareholder, in fact a part owner of the company, and eventually after a takeover or a merger with another big company, going onto the board of the larger company, until we were finally taken over by the Americans and I had a decent sort of a payout and came home, at which point I started the next career. Now, the next career in writing and illustrating was another one where somebody had asked me to do something that changed my life completely. The first book that I wrote, which I wrote and illustrated in collaboration with a photographer called Ewan Sargentson, came about because the publisher, a fellow called David Heap at Heinemann's, asked me to do the book. And having been asked to do a book, I set about doing it, and that launched me onto the second career of writing and illustrating. So those were two people that had a profound effect on changing my career path. I never forget those defining moments.
I think they're fantastic ones, because it really links back to the previous question, be prepared to switch paths, and it looks like, did you...
Yes, I think that what characterises me, if you like, is opportunity, taking opportunity. All through my working life, when opportunity has been offered to me, I've taken it. It doesn't come around all that often, and it's a good idea to take it when it comes.
Oh, great, thank you. Do you have to sacrifice in order for your career to survive? From your advertising, your illustrating, it could be family time, or recreational.
I think let's tackle it from a slightly different point of view. The big question is always, what would you do if you didn't have to go to work? Say you had an unearned income, what would you do with your life? Well, I think if I had had an unearned income, I would have worked just as hard, but I would have done a lot of things that can only be done with the comfort of not relying on having a job. I think one of my big regrets in life was that I started work when I was 15 because the family, I had to. There was no money in our family, so I had to go to work. I would very much like to have gone to university and to have gone on to do something in literature, in the arts, as a result of that, but I couldn't do that. So if I hadn't had to work for a living, I'd have probably spent quite a lot of time fiddling about, writing, travelling, visiting architectural sites of interest and that sort of thing. But I couldn't do that. I had to have the discipline of going to work. So constantly, while I was trying to be happy at work and enjoying my job, I was always tugged by the idea of how nice it would be to go and do something else. Well, of course, once I retired in 1990, once I was bought out, I was in that position, which is consequently why I was able to go and do books and illustration and that sort of thing.
Great, thank you very much. How important was your team in ensuring the success of your career?
Team?
Yes, the people who developed your work or put it into book form, or even if you had a team like that, or...
No, again, that goes back to the first part of the career. That goes back to being in the advertising industry, in the advertising agency business. One worked with teams all the time. And one was only really as good as the people, a bit like Team New Zealand, if you like. You're asking Dean Barker the same question. Well, there's no way he could have achieved what he achieved without the team with him. And in the advertising industry, it comprises a lot of very talented people. And working with people like that brings you along. It's the wind in your sails, if you like. And they were important. The teams were always important. Later, no team apart from my family or one or two people I worked with had an influence on that illustration writing career. Once I had finished writing or illustrating a book, it was passed over to another organisation completely.
Okay.
And it was that team that had to make it work.
Thank you very much. Great. What is the greatest challenge you have faced, and how did you overcome this?
Well, I don't know that there's ever really been one. Actually, in a funny sort of way, being asked to illustrate a book was a big challenge, because although I was an advertising designer for a lot of my life, I'd never ever done any illustration until the Heinemann publisher asked me to illustrate a book. And that was a challenge because I had to find out whether I was capable of being an illustrator. And it was only after I started to do some work that I found out that I was capable of doing it. I actually came very late in life to illustration. I've got a feeling that's probably the biggest challenge. I don't think anything else has been particularly challenging.
Oh, great, thank you.
Leaving Britain and coming to New Zealand. And that was an enormous challenge because one was setting off almost into the unknown. It paid off handsomely. There is absolutely no way I could live in England now. It would be absolutely impossible. And New Zealand has provided me with enormous opportunities. So that, if you like, was a challenge.
Oh, great, thank you. I think, in your own words, what is the key to success?
Persistence. We've been there, we've visited this, sticking at it. Believing in yourself. It's very interesting. A friend of mine has just written a play. And we went to it, and he's a very well-known playwright. And he invited us to a reading of his play the other night. And then he invited us to make comments about it. And I said to him just yesterday, don't listen to us, just go ahead and get your play performed. Because we'll all have points of view and they'll all be different and they'll all influence you. But if you're true to yourself and you stick to what you've done, then that persistence will pay off. When you do a bit of work, like a bit of writing or a bit of illustration, you do it, I do anyway, I do it and I complete it and I put it out there. If somebody likes it, that's great. If they don't, well, that's their business, not mine. But to change it just because of other people's opinion, I think starts to adulterate what you've done. So I like the idea of doing something and sticking with it, you know.